The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous frequency across Seattle General's third floor, a sound so constant it became invisible, like the nurse moving through the corridors at 05 for 7 hours, her scrubs pressed with military precision, her movements efficient but unremarkable. Danielle Ross had been working this hospital for 8 months without leaving a single impression. That was the point. She pushed a medication cart past the nurse's station, her shoes clicking against linoleum in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat, controlled, measured, exactly where it needed to be. Her name badge read D. Ross, RN, nothing more. The other nurses didn't ask questions about her. She didn't encourage conversation. She clocked in, performed her tasks, and clocked out. The kind of invisible that came from deliberate practice. The thermos in her locker rattled when she closed it, dog tags inside, not on her neck where they belonged. Captain Danielle Ross. 23 years old when she'd earned that rank. 42 now, living under a different name in a hospital that had no idea what she was. Army intelligence had placed her here 5 months ago on assignment, watching a medical supply theft ring that ran through the pharmacy like contaminated blood. Every shift, every vital sign check, every interaction was surveillance. Her nursing credentials were real. Her competence was real. Her background was a fiction. The call came through at 0600 exactly. Trauma incoming, 5 minutes, the trauma coordinator announced over the intercom. John Doe, hiking accident in the Hindu Kush foothills, helicopter extraction at 0430, critical condition, ETA to bay in 4 minutes. Danielle was already moving. She'd heard those words before in different hospitals, different countries, always with the same weight. Her limp was slightly more pronounced this morning, the left leg always worsened during double shifts. Shrapnel scar tissue never really stopped complaining about weather changes. She ignored it. Room 314 was prepared in 90 seconds. She moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone whose body remembered trauma situations better than her mind wanted to. For stands positioned. Monitors calibrated. Oxygen tubing coiled like snakes ready to strike. The crash cart sat 3 feet away, exactly where it should be. Danielle had always been good at preparation. That came from surviving situations where preparation meant the difference between breathing and not breathing. The helicopter bay door slammed open at 0604. She heard the rotor wash before she saw the stretcher, that distinctive thud-thud-thud that made every veteran's spine recognize the sound of salvation arriving too late. The smell hit next, diesel fuel, mountain dust, and something else. Fear. Human fear has a scent like copper and burnt hair. The paramedic was shouting vitals as they wheeled the patient toward room 314. 32-year-old male, found unresponsive on the trail approximately 8 kilometers from base camp, altered mental status, respiratory distress, possible crush injury to the thorax, GCS of 4, blood pressure 94/58 and dropping. Danielle was already at the door. She stepped into position with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this in field hospitals while artillery fired overhead. The patient was dark-haired, muscular, delirious, his words a rambling mess of Pashto and English mixed together. She'd heard that mix before in Kandahar. It meant he'd been conscious long enough to speak local dialect with the locals before whatever happened on that mountain had taken his awareness away. She moved to his shirt to place the EKG leads. Her scissors cut through cotton and fabric, revealing pale skin underneath, ribs prominent with the kind of musculature that came from mountain operations training. And then she saw them, dog tags, lying on the stretile field where they'd fallen when his shirt came free. Her fingers stopped. Exactly 2 seconds. That was all she allowed herself. The dog tags read J. Matthews, O+, and beneath that, a service number. 07-4829-R. Her hands knew that number the way a lock knows a specific key. She'd served with that number. Had shared a tent in Kandahar with the person who wore those dog tags. Had carried him 6 kilometers through Taliban fire when his knee shattered on a rooftop in Jolan district while she was still Captain Danielle Ross instead of just Danielle the invisible nurse. She placed the EKG leads with steady hands. No tremor. No hesitation. The professional mask stayed locked in place. Her voice came out calm and clinical. Let's get 2 large bore 4s, 1,200 milliliters normal saline running wide open, and someone get me a 12 lead right now. The team moved. They had no idea who she was. Had no idea that the quiet nurse with the steady hands had just recognized someone from a life she wasn't supposed to have anymore. During foreplacement on his left forearm, she saw it. Her name. Not her nursing credential name, not her cover identity. Her real name, the one she'd left behind in the Hindu Kush mountains, tattooed in faded ink across his inner arm in handwriting she recognized. The letter shapes matched the notes he used to leave in her footlocker when they were both deployed to the same fire base. Danielle placed the 4 needle without hesitation, secured the catheter, and began the saline infusion. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. His oxygen saturation sat at 78%, critical. She moved his shirt aside to listen for breath sounds and found them unequal, the right side barely audible. Her clinical mind catalogued the signs immediately: unequal breath sounds, distended neck veins, tracheal deviation, hypertension. The body was telling a story. Tension pneumothorax developing. The air was escaping into his chest cavity and collapsing his right lung with each breath, like a slowly tightening fist around his heart. She stepped back and made eye contact with the trauma resident. His breath sounds are diminished on the right with deviation. His developing tension pneumothorax. We need to decompress before his cardiovascular system collapses. The resident glanced at the monitor. Let's wait for the chest X-ray. Danielle said nothing. She simply turned away and continued monitoring. The professional mask had slipped for just a moment, and she could feel it. The voice that had come out was different from the deferential nurse voice she'd cultivated. It had carried authority. Command. The kind of tone that came from 6 years of leading Rangers through combat operations. She tucked it away and became invisible again. Dr. Mercer entered room 314 exactly as she was securing a second full line. He was a tall man with the kind of presence that made doorways seem smaller when he occupied them, the kind of surgeon who'd learned to carry his ego like a medical degree. His eyes moved from the patient to the monitors to Danielle, and she saw the moment his expression shifted. Fascinating assessment, Nurse Ross, he said, his smile sharp as a scalpel. Tell me, which medical school did you attend? I don't recall seeing needle decompression protocols in the RN curriculum. The room went still. The monitors kept their steady beep, indifferent to social hierarchies. Danielle continued securing the 4 without looking up. I was noting the clinical presentation, she said quietly. Diminished breath sounds on the right with distended neck veins and tracheal deviation. Standard assessment. Standard assessment, Mercer repeated, turning to address the residents as if Danielle wasn't standing 2 feet away. Residents, let this be a teaching moment. Nurses occasionally mistake correlation for diagnosis. It's a common cognitive error in their training. The patient's X-ray will tell us what's actually occurring. One of the residents looked uncomfortable. The other one was already writing notes, following the attending's lead. Mercer leaned against the counter with the posture of someone who'd never been questioned in his life, his white coat hanging perfectly, his silver watch visible where he deliberately rolled up his sleeve to show it. That watch probably cost more than Danielle made in 3 months. The kind of expensive that announced itself. Continue with standard monitoring, he said to the room, then to Danielle specifically, and perhaps stick to the protocols you're trained for, Nurse Ross. The adults will handle the diagnosis. He left, his presence leaving the room somehow larger than before. The resident who'd looked uncomfortable wouldn't meet Danielle's eyes. She finished securing the 4, checked the saline drip rate one final time, and moved out of the way. The X-ray took 18 minutes. By the time it came back positive, tension pneumothorax, clear as a textbook image, Mercer had already made rounds and left the department. He wouldn't see it. Wouldn't acknowledge it. And Danielle would say nothing, because saying nothing was part of the mission. Part of staying invisible. Part of being Captain Danielle Ross, who nobody knew was a captain at all. She checked Matthew's vital signs again. Oxygen saturation was dropping. 84. 81. 79. His body was running out of time, and somewhere on the other side of unconsciousness, he was carrying her name like a secret tattoo. The next 8 hours would determine whether she could save him without destroying the operation that had placed her in this hospital in the first place. She'd survived worse odds than this. She'd survived Taliban fire and IED explosions and watching soldiers die in tents with nothing but flashlights and prayer. But she'd never had to do it while pretending to be someone she wasn't. Danielle pulled up a chair beside room 314's window and began watching him breathe, her hands folded in her lap, her face expressionless, her mind already calculating 17 different scenarios for how this could end. She had no idea that the real nightmare had just begun. The next morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Danielle had spent the night in room 314's observation chair, watching Matthews breathe, counting the rise and fall of his chest like a meditation she couldn't afford to break. His sister had finally left around midnight. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in that particular hospital blue that made time feel optional. When shift change came at 6, Danielle was already moving through the corridors, her scrubs still carrying the faint copper smell of trauma and the sharper chemical bite of antiseptic. She had made it exactly 47 steps toward the medication dispensary when Dr. Mercer appeared at the intersection of the hallway and room 314's entrance like a storm front moving into clear sky. Matthew's sister was watching through the window behind him. Danielle saw her face reflect in the glass, confused, alert, the way family members become when they sense institutional conflict. Mercer's smile arrived before his words did, that particular kind of smile that looked like a knife showing its blade. "Nurse Ross seems to think she knows better than physicians," he announced. His voice carried the specific weight of someone speaking for an audience. 2 residents flanking him smirked in synchronized harmony, wolves recognizing their alpha. Perhaps she should explain why she's ordering specialist consults without authorization. Danielle felt the words land like pressure against her sternum. Her hands wanted to move. Her voice wanted to crack. Neither did. "I ordered what the patient needed, doctor." The words came out measured. Flat. Professional. Inside her chest, a single tear formed and she felt it before she saw it, hot and traitorous and completely unacceptable. She wiped it with one efficient motion, never breaking eye contact, her jaw locked tight enough to grind teeth into powder. Mercer leaned closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and something underneath it, something like expensive cologne trying to cover ambition that had curdled into something darker. "Stay in your lane, Nightingale," he said quietly. The word was a cage. The word was a threat disguised as advice. He straightened, satisfied with the silence that followed, and walked away without waiting for a response. That was stage 2 escalation. Public humiliation. The establishment of hierarchy through witnessed insult. Danielle stood in that hallway for exactly 4 seconds, letting her heartbeat settle, then continued toward the medication dispensary. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The part of her that had carried 3 wounded Rangers through Taliban fire for 6 miles in Kandahar was still there, still watching, still patient. She locked it back down. She had a cover to maintain and a mission that would collapse if anyone, especially Mercer, discovered what she actually was. By afternoon, the fracture had spread through the nursing staff like hairline cracks in reinforced glass. Danielle entered the break room at 1,447 hours with her lunch container, turkey sandwich, apple, black coffee, nothing that would leave a trace of who she was. The room held 3 other nurses, Karen from days, Beth from the ICU rotation, and Tom who worked pediatrics. The moment her presence registered, they moved. All 3 of them. Standing with the synchronized precision of a rehearsed choreography, abandoning their steaming coffee cups on the formica table, abandoning the half-eaten pastry on a napkin, abandoning any pretense that this wasn't coordinated. No one spoke. The silence that followed had texture. It had weight. It had the specific quality of a door closing and locking in a room where she stood alone. Danielle sat down anyway. She opened her container. She took a bite of the sandwich, and the bread felt like cardboard, and she chewed it anyway because showing weakness was not an option. The wall clock above the sink clicked through seconds. 60 of them. 120. She could hear the fluorescent light's nearly inaudible hum underneath everything, a sound most people didn't consciously register but which she'd been trained to recognize as a marker of institutional buildings, hospitals, detention facilities, interrogation rooms. Spaces where time became currency. She was finishing the apple when she noticed Karen's phone on the table, a text notification still visible, done. He wants to know if she reacts. Danielle didn't acknowledge it. She didn't change her breathing. She simply noted the fact the way a sniper notes wind direction and distance and altitude compensation. Mercer had orchestrated this. Mercer was watching how she handled exclusion. The break room felt very large and very small simultaneously. By evening shift change, the written documentation had appeared. The unit disciplinary board hung in the main hallway near the nurse's station, visible to every staff member, every visitor, every patient's family member passing through. Her name was there in red marker that looked like blood, or was meant to look like blood, spelling out, unauthorized protocol deviation, final warning. The word sat beneath her name with the weight of an execution order. Staff members walked past with varying degrees of eye contact avoidance. Some pointed. Some whispered. One resident actually laughed, a sound that stopped when his attending turned toward him with the kind of expression that suggested his residency might depend on sudden professional behavior. Danielle stood in the main corridor and read her own professional destruction like she was reading someone else's chart. Factual. Documented. Undeniable. Across the nurse's station, Dr. Mercer stood with his arms crossed, watching her reaction like a hunter watching a wounded animal to see if it would run or fight. She turned away. She did not give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. She did not give him the satisfaction of watching her cry or argue or defend herself. What he saw instead was her spine straightening incrementally, was her walking toward the supply closet without changing pace, was her carrying a clipboard with a grip that left white knuckles in her wake, not from fear, but from the sheer discipline of keeping her hands from shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with humiliation. What Dr. Mercer didn't understand was that the woman he was systematically destroying had once sat in an interrogation room in Kandahar while someone with a very specific type of authority tried to break her with much more severe methods than red marker and coordinated social exclusion. She had stared at that man with her hands cable-tied behind her back and his boot on her chest, and she had not broken. This was different. This was worse in some ways, the slow institutional assassination of a false identity, and infinitely more survivable because the stakes were different. Her cover was the price. Not her life. By the time night shift arrived, Danielle had made a decision that lived in the cold compartment of her brain where Captain Ross, her real name, her real rank, her real authority, kept her most critical calculations. She would continue working. She would continue monitoring Matthews and the specialist consults he would need. She would continue documenting the discrepancies in Mercer's orders because those discrepancies connected directly to her actual mission, the medical supply theft ring that had been operating inside Seattle General for 7 months and which would require a Level 1 formal investigation before she could extract from this assignment. She would continue being invisible. She would continue being smaller than herself. But that was only true until it wasn't. That was only true until something forced her hand. The night shift supervisor, Maria, greeted her with the kind of careful neutrality that meant she'd been instructed to maintain professional distance but was uncomfortable doing it. Danielle received her assignments without comment: COVID overflow ward, medication rounds, post-operative checks on 3 patients in the South Wing. Everything designed to keep her away from room 314. Everything designed to isolate her further. She took the assignments and nodded and began her rounds at 2,000 hours with the same quiet precision she'd maintained through humiliation and exclusion and written warnings. Her hands moved through checking for lines and documenting vital signs and administering medications like they were following a protocol written into muscle memory rather than conscious thought. At 2,100 hours, she was in the supply closet on the South Wing restocking the emergency crash cart with crystalloid solution bags when she heard it, the code blue alarm. The sound that cuts through every hospital noise and rewires every medical professional's nervous system into a different frequency. Room 314. The code blue alarm meant Matthews was crashing. It meant tension pneumothorax or massive hemorrhage or something else that had happened in the 37 minutes since the last vital signs check. It meant the man with her name tattooed on his forearm was experiencing acute decompensation. It meant the man who was keeping a secret about her true identity was dying in a room where she'd been explicitly reassigned away from. Danielle abandoned the 4 bags. She ran. The code blue alarm split the night like a scream. Danielle abandoned the 4 bags. She ran. Room 314 was chaos wearing fluorescent lights. Matthews lay rigid on the stretcher, his chest moving in shallow, fractured breaths. The monitor showed oxygen saturation dropping like a stone, 92, 88, 84. His trachea was deviated hard to the left, pushed there by pressure building inside his own chest cavity. Tension pneumothorax. The diagnosis screamed at her in clinical language she'd learned in a place where there was no time for second opinions. She didn't need the chest x-ray they were calling for. She didn't need the attending physician who was somewhere in the hospital, 3 minutes away. She needed a needle. Now. The crash cart was already wheeled in. Her hands moved toward it like they'd never stopped being a soldier's hands, efficient, certain, the kind of hands that had learned precision under circumstances that didn't allow for mistakes. She pulled the drawer open. 14-gauge angiocath needle. Her fingers found it the way a sniper's hand finds a trigger. "What are you doing?" a resident said. His name tag said Thompson. His voice said panic. Danielle didn't answer. She swabbed Matthew's chest above his second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The antiseptic smell cut through the room's thickness. Her breathing stayed level. Everyone else was breathing like they'd run a marathon. Danielle's breath was a metronome. "Step back," she said to Thompson. Not a request. A command delivered in a voice that made the room's air pressure change. The needle went in. The angle was precise, perpendicular to the rib cage, no hesitation, no tremor. The kind of insertion that came from hands that had performed field surgery while explosions painted the sky orange. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her jaw was locked. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint, the coiled muscle of someone who understood that 1 wrong millimeter meant a collapsed lung, a cardiac tamponade, death on a stretcher at 0247 hours on a Tuesday night. Then the hiss. The sound of pressurized air escaping, a rush so sudden and violent that the monitor's alarm choked mid-scream. The trachea corrected itself. The chest rose bilaterally, symmetrical, alive. "You perform that procedure and I will have your license." Mercer's voice arrived before his body did. He materialized in the doorway like a storm front moving inland, his face already red with the kind of rage that comes from losing control of a room. Danielle didn't look at him. Matthew's oxygen saturation was climbing now. 75, 82, 89, each number was a heartbeat that had almost stopped forever. She stabilized the needle, secured it with tape, her movements so practiced they looked like choreography. A sinus rhythm pulsed steady on the monitor. The crisis, which had lasted exactly 98 seconds from alarm to resolution, was over. But Mercer was just beginning. He pulled his phone out before the attending physician even reached the room. The camera flash went off. Once. Twice. 3 times. Documenting the needle in Matthew's chest. The equipment tray. Danielle's badge number clipped to her scrub pocket. She saw him photographing her hands, the hands that had just saved a life without waiting for permission. "Step away from the patient," Mercer said. His voice had dropped below his normal register, which made it somehow more lethal. "Now." Dr. Reeves, the attending, rushed in, took in the scene in a single practice sweep. The deviated trachea corrected. The O2 sat in the safe range. The needle exactly where it should be. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Matthews. He looked at Danielle. "Talk to me," Reeves said. Danielle spoke in a low, clipped language of someone reporting facts to command. Tension pneumothorax. Tracheal deviation, hypoxia, respiratory distress. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, midclavicular line. Pressurized air confirmed diagnosis. Patient now stable. Sinus rhythm maintained. Oxygen saturation recovering. The words landed like she'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. Which, in a way, she had, in a different life, in a place where wrong procedure meant someone didn't come home. Unauthorized intervention, Mercer said. His phone was already in his hand, composed an email, hit send. Hospital Regulation 7.3.2 explicitly states that nursing staff shall not perform procedures reserved for physicians. The patient was dying, Danielle said. Her voice was so quiet Mercer had to lean in to hear it. I prevented that. You violated protocol. He turned to Reeves. I will be filing a formal complaint. With the medical board. And security. What happened next happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Reeves looked at the monitor. Looked at Matthews. Looked at Danielle. Then he looked at Mercer with eyes that had been doing this work for 23 years. The needle decompression was indicated, Reeves said. Textbook procedure. Appropriate intervention under critical circumstances. If anyone had a problem with it, they should be talking to me, not filing complaints. Mercer's jaw tightened. His face went from red to purple, the color of something that had been held underwater. The chain of command. Says the closest qualified professional takes appropriate action to save a life, Reeves finished. That's what happened here. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to arrange the chest tube before this deteriorates again. Mercer left. He walked out of room 314 with the kind of stride that left a wake of anger behind him like diesel exhaust. Danielle stood motionless beside Matthew's stretcher, her hand still steady, her breathing still measured. The crisis had passed. The real crisis was just beginning. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part happened during the day shift, when Danielle found the documentation in her locker. An incident report, filed at 0321 hours, citing unauthorized medical practice without appropriate licensure. A formal complaint to the Colorado Medical Board. A performance improvement plan documenting every break she'd taken 3 minutes late over the past month, 17 documented instances, flagged in red, dated and timed with the precision of someone who had been waiting for ammunition. Mercer handed her the stapled pages personally. His smile was sharp as a scalpel. Heroics don't excuse incompetence, he said. Loud enough for 2 nurses and a resident to hear. Loud enough for it to land like a punch. Danielle took the pages. She didn't read them. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. What she did was meet his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, long enough for him to see the difference between a nurse and a woman who had once moved through the Hindu Kush with 3 wounded rangers strapped to her back and a radio operator calling extraction coordinates while rounds snapped past her head like angry wasps. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him holding the moment like a weapon he'd expected to hit harder. By morning, the termination letter was in the pocket of her locker. Effective immediately. Security escorted her out at 0700 hours. The parking lot was grey. The rain had started sometime during her shift, the kind of cold September rain that soaked through everything and didn't apologize for it. Her intelligence handler had already called twice. The 3rd call she answered. You've compromised the operation, he said. No greeting. No preamble. Just the voice of someone watching 5 months of surveillance infrastructure collapse like a house of cards. The medical board complaint creates an official record. It triggers background checks. Extraction in 72 hours. Pack light. Tell no one. Danielle didn't go home. She drove instead. Out past the city limits, past the suburbs with their identical mailboxes and identical dreams, past the point where the mountains started looking less like a landscape and more like something that had been broken and rebuilt 1,000 times. She drove for 2 hours without stopping, her hand steady on the wheel, her breathing measured the way it had been during the crisis, during the humiliation, during every moment when staying composed was the same thing as staying alive. The rain hammered the windshield like applause for a performance nobody was watching. She was losing the operation. She was losing her cover. She was losing her access to the facility she'd been embedded in for 5 months, the work that mattered, the invisible war that nobody got medals for. She was losing everything. And Matthews was still in that hospital, memory fractured, his identity in the hands of a doctor who would file another complaint if Danielle even tried to call. The fluorescent lights of an all-night diner appeared through the rain. She pulled in at 03 for 7 hours, ordered black coffee that arrived cold, and stared at the reflection of a woman she didn't quite recognize anymore, someone caught between two lives, belonging completely to neither, sacrificing both for a man who wouldn't remember her face when he finally woke up. The coffee had gone cold exactly 1 hour ago. Danielle stared at her reflection in the black liquid, watching it ripple when her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the white-hot precision of rage held perfectly still. Highway 24 stretched empty in both directions, brake lights disappearing into rain that fell like automatic weapons fire on the diner's windows. 17 missed calls from Marcus. 5 from Matthew's sister. 3 from hospital administration. Each one a nail driven deeper into the coffin of Operation Copper Shield. The waitress had stopped asking if she needed anything after the second hour. Danielle wore the uniform of someone who belonged nowhere, civilian clothes that didn't fit her spine, her nursing badge still clipped to her belt like a talisman to a god that had stopped listening. The dog tags in her pocket weighed exactly 1.4 ounces but felt like anchors dragging her toward the ocean floor. She pulled them out, her own tags from Kandahar, not Matthew's. 8 years she'd carried them. 8 years of muscle memory so precise it operated independently of conscious thought. The call sign was worn almost to illegibility, Phoenix Actual. Underneath, her real service number. The number Mercer didn't know. The number that connected her to the Pentagon in ways that paperwork couldn't explain. The memory hit without warning, the way trauma memories do, sudden and complete, like diving into water that closes over your head. She was back in the Hindu Kush foothills, 0200 hours, muzzle flashes turning night into false day. 3 rangers down. One of them was screaming her name over and over, delirious from blood loss, terrified she wouldn't hear him and leave him behind. Matthews. Young face, maybe 23. Tactical call sign, Hammer. He kept saying, "Captain, Captain, I'm sorry," and she kept saying, stay with me," and her uniform was so soaked with his blood that the sweat underneath couldn't evaporate. 6 miles. 6 miles through Taliban fire with 2 rangers across her shoulders and one dragging behind her by his collar strap. Matthews had looked up at her at mile 4, his eyes starting to unfocus, and asked, "What's your name?" "I need to know your name so I don't forget. So I know who's carrying me." She'd told him. Captain Danielle Ross. 75th Ranger Regiment. He'd survived. He'd done more than survive, he'd made her permanent. Tattooed her name into his forearm the moment he was combat effective again. Her name, not just her rank. Not just her unit. Asterisk her star. Now he couldn't remember her face. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that particular sound that only exists in American diners at 0347 hours, lonely and electric and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus. She let it ring twice, then answered. "Mom, where are you?" His voice cracked like a boy's. 16 years old, and he had her father's timbre, deep and steady until fear split it open. "Marcus, you cannot contact me on this line. I found your stuff. The stuff you keep in the locked case. I know you told me never to open it, but Mom," he was breathing hard. "They fired you for saving someone. That's wrong." Every command she'd ever received, every protocol burned into her spine during 2 decades of service, screamed at her to hang up. To go dark. To let her cover identity dissolve like bodies in acid and wait for extraction orders that might never come. but he was 16 and he was crying and he'd opened a case that contained the physical evidence of everything she was. "Marcus, you cannot be at that hospital. You need to go home. Now." "I'm already at the hospital. They need to see these." The line went dead. Not disconnected, dead. The way comms go dark when someone cuts the wire deliberately. Danielle was moving before her brain caught up. The Subaru was parked under the diner's awning, silver paint gleaming like a sword in the sodium lights. She threw $40 on the table, more than the coffee was worth, but she'd never been taught to nickel-and-dime civilian establishments, and walked out into the rain like she was walking toward something instead of away from it. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was steady. The only thing unstable was everything she'd built in the past 5 months, crumbling like a structure that had been hollow from the beginning. The drive back to Seattle General took 14 minutes. She hit 73 miles per hour through a school zone and didn't look in the mirror. Extraction protocols were already running through her head like subroutines. Burn the identity. Disappear the credentials. Assume a new cover within 24 hours. The Army intelligence operation was already compromised. If Marcus had the case, others knew. The supply theft ring would scatter. The months of surveillance, the careful documentation, the 3 members of the trafficking network she'd already identified for federal prosecution, all of it atomized. But first, she had to get her son out of that lobby before the wrong people understood what he was carrying. The parking lot at Seattle General was nearly empty at 0630, the dead stretch of morning when night shift nurses are counting down their remaining hours and day shift staff are still finishing coffee at home. Danielle pulled into a space marked for physicians and didn't bother locking the car. Protocol said she should never return to this location. Protocol also said a lot of things that sounded reasonable in briefing rooms and catastrophic in real life. She walked through the automatic doors, and the first thing she registered was sound, not the normal diner hum of a hospital morning, but silence. The kind of silence that means bad tactical situations. The kind that makes veteran senses go electric. Marcus was standing near the information desk, holding the wooden case she kept in a locked compartment at the back of her closet. She'd told him 100 times never to open it. He was 16. He'd opened it. A hospital security guard was approaching him with the careful movements of someone dealing with an unstable situation. Matthew sat in a wheelchair 3 feet away, his sister beside him, both of them staring at Marcus like he'd materialized from combat footage. Danielle moved toward her son, and that's when Matthew's eyes found her across the lobby. The moment lasted maybe half a second, the time it takes for a neural pathway to fire, for trauma-fractured memory to suddenly reconnect, for a name tattooed on an arm to align with the woman standing 30 feet away. He whispered something. Just one thing. Just 2 words that traveled across the lobby with the precision of a sniper round. Phoenix Actual. She watched the name land like shrapnel. The 2 orderlies froze. The visiting National Guard sergeant's hand went to his collar. The janitor, who might have been Iraq, might have been Afghanistan, definitely had the bearing of someone who understood that particular call sign meant something that intelligence agencies kept classified, went very still. Marcus opened the case before Danielle could reach him. Before she could stop what was about to happen. Before the rubber band holding everything together snapped like overstretched wire. Inside, medals in presentation boxes. Bronze Star. Silver Star. Purple Heart. Purple Heart again. Photographs in uniform from 8 years ago, face younger, smile still intact. Citations folded with the precision of someone who understood that paper could be a weapon. And underneath it all, the jacket lining itself, faded unit patch from her ranger company, sewn in by her own hands during a patrol in Kandahar, given to Matthews on a night she'd carried him 6 miles and promised him she wouldn't let him die. A young Marine in the waiting room, someone Danielle had never seen before, stepped forward and picked up the citation with hands that moved like he was handling something sacred. He read the words aloud. His voice carried the weight of formal recognition, the kind that only exists in military spaces. Captain Danielle Ross. Bronze Star with Valor. For carrying 3 wounded Rangers through hostile territory and Dr. Mercer pushed through the growing crowd, his face red the way faces go red when someone's entire worldview is collapsing in real time. This is hospital property. You're all trespassing. Security, remove these people immediately. But people were pulling out phones. Searching her name. Finding images. Finding citations. Finding proof. A Navy corpsman in the corner, older, weathered, carrying the weight of someone who'd lost comrades, stepped forward with recognition flooding his face. You're the medic. From the Kandahar extraction. You were all over the classified briefings. The one who carried Rangers out through. The automatic doors slid open. A two-star general in army dress uniform walked through those doors like an answer to a prayer no one had spoken aloud. His dress uniform was immaculate. His bearing was the kind that comes from command experience. Behind him, two military police officers moved with the synchronized precision of people trained to execute orders without hesitation. The general's eye swept the lobby, registered the situation in approximately 1.3 seconds, and then he rendered a salute. A full, formal salute. Directed at Danielle Ross, standing in civilian clothes in the lobby of a Colorado hospital with her 16-year-old son holding classified materials. Captain Ross. The Pentagon sends its regards regarding Operation Copper Shield. Mercer's face drained of color like water through a broken dam. There must be some mistake, he started to say, but the general didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge him. Didn't do anything that would suggest the doctor's existence had registered at all. Captain Ross has been conducting a counterintelligence operation at this facility for 5 months. The investigation you launched, Dr. Mercer, the one demanding a full audit of her credentials and background, triggered a Department of Defense security sweep. One of the MPs handed Danielle a tablet. On the screen, scans of documents. Invoices. Mercer's digital signature authorizing shipments of surgical equipment to addresses in Ciudad Juarez. Signatures on medication orders that didn't match approved protocols. Orders that had nearly killed Matthews because they'd altered the standard electrolyte balance in his for infusions, causing the cardiac instability that led to his pneumothorax in the first place. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then everything changed. Danielle was clearing out her locker when the employee entrance burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his 17-year-old frame silhouetted against the hallway fluorescence, carrying a wooden case like a pallbearer. His voice cracked as he spoke, "Mom, I don't care about your mission anymore." The case was mahogany, lined with velvet. Danielle's hands froze on the stack of scrubs she'd been folding. She didn't turn around. She didn't ask how he got past security or why he was risking her cover. She just waited, because that's what mothers do when their children are about to detonate the world. Marcus opened the case. Inside, mounted on cream-colored parchment, sat a bronze star with velar device. The ribbon's red and white stripes caught the fluorescent light like they were burning. Below it, engraved into burnished bronze, Captain Danielle Ross, United States Army, for extraordinary heroism in ground combat operations. A young Marine in the waiting room, barely 20, with a chest rack of ribbons, stepped forward. His voice was steady as surgical steel, for carrying 3 wounded Rangers through Taliban-controlled territory, engaging hostile forces while under direct fire, maintaining tactical command structure despite injuries sustained during. The rest of his words dissolved into background noise. Because that's when the hospital doors opened, and the air changed. Not the usual shift of bodies moving through space. The air pressure itself altered, like when a helicopter's rotor wash hits you and your lungs compress into something smaller and denser. A 2-star general in dress uniform walked through the ER entrance. His ribbons began at his neck and stopped halfway down his chest. His shoulders carried the weight of command the way other men carry briefcases. He was flanked by 2 officers in Class A dress blues, and their presence made the tile floor feel thinner, as if the whole hospital might collapse through to something beneath it. The general's eyes found Danielle. He rendered a salute, not casual, not ceremonial, but the kind of salute rendered to someone you've seen lead men under fire. His hand stayed elevated for exactly 3 seconds. "Captain Ross," he said, his voice like a tank idling in a garage. "The Pentagon sends its regards regarding Operation Copper Shield." The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then everything changed. Dr. Mercer backed away, his briefcase falling. Papers scattered across the tile like white leaves. "I was simply following protocol." "You weaponized hospital policy to silence the one person investigating you," the general said. "It wasn't a question. It was a verdict." Federal agents entered through the ambulance bay. 3 of them, wearing windbreakers with Department of Defense Counterintelligence Service emblems. One moved toward Mercer with the fluid precision of apex predators. An MP, a military police, blocked the exit with the kind of stillness that comes from having done this 1,000 times before. Hospital administration arrived next. The chief of staff, the medical director, both pale as transplant patients waiting for organs. The CEO appeared, her heels clicking on tile in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. "We had no idea Captain Ross was." "You had no idea because she was doing her job," the general interrupted. "While your physician was stealing from wounded veterans." They found the evidence in Mercer's office by 1400 hours. Falsified medical supply receipts dating back 18 months. Shell company invoices routed through Delaware and Nevada. Communications with private military contractors offering to move pharmaceutical inventory through non-standard channels. The numbers were catastrophic: $847,000 in diverted supplies. Morphine meant for amputees redirected to pain management clinics. Cardiac medications bound for the VA routed to private hospitals. Each deviation documented. Each theft authorized by Dr. Mercer's signature on procurement forms. The medical board representative who'd received Mercer's complaint against Danielle, the one requesting a full audit of her credentials and background, reviewed the Dodd briefing. She tore the complaint in half on camera. The pieces fell like confetti over the tile. Matthews was wheeled closer to the gathering. His memory had begun returning in fragments over the past hours, pieces of Kandahar crystallizing through the fog of head trauma. He reached for Danielle's hand. His fingers were steady as pulse oximetry readings. "You told me your name 47 times that night," he said, his voice catching. "So I'd remember. So I could find you if I made it." He rolled up his sleeve. The tattoo was there, Danielle in military script along his forearm, the ink faded to the color of old denim. But underneath, stitched inside his jacket lining with meticulous field repair precision, was something else. A faded unit patch. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines insignia. Rangers Company colors. The one Danielle had given him during that endless night in Kandahar when they'd been pinned down for 3 hours before the extraction birds came. 3 hours and 47 minutes to be exact. Exactly 5 hours before the rescue helicopters finally arrived. The crowd in the lobby had grown to over 50 now, a nursing staff, orderlies, patients in wheelchairs, families waiting for discharge paperwork. Someone started clapping. The sound echoed off the linoleum like ammunition. Another person joined in. Then another. Then the whole lobby erupted, and the applause sounded like a rotor wash, like the sound of survival itself. Danielle stood in her civilian clothes, terminated but vindicated, as Mercer was led away in handcuffs. His face had gone the color of surgical gauze. One officer read him his rights. Another secured his briefcase as evidence. The MP behind him didn't touch his arm, didn't have to. The weight of command itself was enough to keep him moving forward. The hospital CEO approached Danielle with the careful steps of someone walking toward a live wire. "Captain Ross, we'd like to discuss your reinstatement with full back pay, Anne." "My mission here is complete," Danielle said. She didn't meet the CEO's eyes. She was already looking past her, toward the window, toward the parking lot, toward the next thing. 6 months later, Danielle watched from her restored office window, not at Seattle General, but at a VA hospital across town where she now worked as Director of Emergency Services. Her true rank and credentials were public record now. Her Bronze Star sat in a display case on her desk, no longer hidden in some emergency locker beside field rations and spare ammunition. In the parking lot below, Dr. Mercer loaded boxes into a medical supply van. He wore an orange vest marked Prison Healthcare Program, Community Service. His medical license suspended for 7 years. His career dismantled. His freedom conditional. He drove supplies to correctional facilities now as part of his plea agreement with the Department of Justice. The van's hydraulic lift hissed as he loaded another stack of boxes, the sound of air escaping from somewhere that could never be filled again. Matthew sat in Danielle's waiting room, rolling up his sleeve to show a visiting group of nursing students. His memory had fully returned now, along with his strength. The tattoo was visible, and the patch inside his jacket. She carried me and 2 other rangers for 6 miles, he told them, his voice steady as a medic's hands. Never stopped. Never quit. 5 hours later, extraction birds came. But those 5 hours, he paused. Those 5 hours meant everything. Marcus wore his ROTC uniform, the one he'd earned through his own merit, his own discipline. He was preparing for his own service now. Danielle had learned long ago that you don't discourage the ones with fire in their eyes. You just teach them how to survive the burn. A young nurse approached Danielle's office, nervous energy radiating like fever. "Captain, we have a John Doe incoming. Combat injuries, no visible ID, possible IED trauma." Danielle stood. She put on her white coat, the one with Captain Danielle Ross, RN, BSN, Bronze Star embroidered over the left chest pocket. "I'll take him." As she walked toward the ER, Matthews called after her from the waiting room, "Phoenix Actual." She turned. She smiled, actually smiled, not the tight composure smile, but something real underneath. "That's not my call sign anymore, Ranger." "What is it?" His eyes were bright, finally clear. She glanced at the incoming ambulance pulling around the corner, EMTs already unloading another broken soldier who needed someone who understood. Someone who'd been there. Someone who knew that survival wasn't about being unbreakable, it was about breaking in ways that let the light through. "It's just Captain Ross now," Danielle said. "And that's enough." She met the gurney. The patient was a young sergeant, maybe 23, with field dressings already soaked through on his left leg. IED trauma, just like she'd seen before. Just like she'd lived. The sergeant's eyes locked onto hers for a second, that moment when a soldier recognizes another soldier, and she saw the fear dissolve into something else. Relief. Recognition. The knowledge that he'd made it to someone who understood. 12-minute transport time, the EMT said. BP 102/68, dropping. O2 sat 92% on supplemental oxygen. "We've got 2 large bore 4s running, 1 unit whole blood already started." "Get him to Trauma Bay 1, Danielle commanded. "Call vascular. Get me a surgical consult now. Page the OR, we're going to need a rapid decompression assessment." Her hands were already moving, already reading the damage, already calculating survival odds the way pilots calculate fuel and altitude and fuel again. The ones who have seen the worst often give the most. If you're watching this and feeling that something inside you recognizes Danielle, that quiet strength in the ones nobody sees, please like this video and subscribe. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been judged by someone who had no idea who you really were? And if your boss ever tried to silence you for doing the right thing, we want to hear how you fought back. Thank you for watching.